Presenter today is Oracle ace Anton Nielsen, and he's the Vice President Consulting Services at INSUM, and having joined us February 2018 when INSUM was acquired C2 Consulting, an Oracle consultation firm out of Boston, of which Anton was president. Mr. Nielsen has extensive consulting, development, and project management experience with hundreds of clients through work with INSUM and C2, as well as with Oracle and the United States Air Force. He's also a frequent presenter at Oracle events. He's received recognitions for these presentations, such as ODTUG K-Scope Top Speaker Overall 2015, ODTUG K-Scope Top Speaker Apex 2015, and the Oracle Consulting Leadership 2000 Award. Anton's specialty skills include system architecture, database design, project management, application development, reliability modeling and analysis, logistics and optimization, network analysis, and storage architectures. And now, let's begin. Anton, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Mark. So, as Mark mentioned, I am a Vice President at INSUM. I've been lobbying for the title of Chief Mentoring Officer. It's not official yet, but I'm going to continue to just put it on my slides. So there we have it. I've given this presentation a couple of times now, and I've realized that despite the title that we've published, I probably should change the title to be a little bit more expansive and to be establishing a peer code review program for Apex development, because this is really about what it means to do code reviews in general, why we do code reviews, and how to go about getting that a real program set up in your organization. So I'll cover the specifics of an actual code review of an Apex application at a high level, but it's really about the benefits and the overall structure for developing a code review program. So we'll go through why we do code reviews, talk about documenting your goals, documenting coding standards, making your code reviews lightweight, using automated tools, checklists, talk a little bit about the purpose of fixing bugs and when those defects get fixed, assessing the results, making improvements, and we'll review some of the artifacts that you would want to have as part of your code review process. I'll also say that I'll make several artifacts available, and I'll provide how to get at those artifacts at the end of this presentation. So why do we do code reviews at all? And the real answer is to save money, to improve quality, and really to improve morale. And there may be other reasons that your organization decides to do code reviews. And you'll want to document that and specifically talk about your goals. But when it comes to peer code reviews, the reason that we do peer code reviews is that they're highly efficient. I've been in organizations where they have a whole team get together and they do team code reviews, or they do some other formal process. And those code reviews are very effective. They do a great job at catching bugs, but they're less efficient than a peer-to-code review. Peer code reviews happen quickly. They don't take a lot of time out of people's day, but they're very effective and very efficient. They're also educational for both the developer and the person doing the code review. And really, we'll talk more about that, but anyone should be able to do a code review. It doesn't have to be a more skilled developer reviewing a less skilled developer's code. It's called peer code reviews because it can be the people at the same level, or really it can be people at disparate levels. The other thing is we want to be able to leverage and broaden our skill sets. When we do a code review, we're leveraging our own skill sets and applying those to the code, but we're also broadening our understanding of the way the code is written. And in often we're learning a new application that we might not have as much insight into. So I highly encourage you to document your organization's code review goals. Those goals are aspirational in many cases, but by documenting them, you're able to share them with your organization and present a reason and justification for having such a program. The main reason that people do peer code reviews, and this is what we see all the time, is that it improves quality. It also reduces time to implement new features. This is something that I often hear people say as an argument against doing code reviews, is that they don't have time to do a code review. Study after study after study has shown that peer code reviews actually allow you to reduce your development time overall, because you spend less time fixing defects that have made it to production, and you're able to catch those earlier in the cycle, which means that you have more resources available to do new code. So peer code reviews in study after study after study indicate that you actually reduce time to implement new features. So for everybody that tells me that they don't have time to do peer code reviews, my answer is you don't have time to not do peer code reviews. You'll end up with happier customers, whether those are customers of your product or internal customers that are relying on you to develop new functionality for them. And you'll improve your developers' skill sets. You'll reduce risk. When an employee wins the lottery and they leave the project, somebody will have at least looked at the code and have some understanding of the code. If you have one person that's been the only person working on a particular module or particular code base, that's very, very risky. And this is another aspect that studies have also shown, that people like the interaction. The interaction with their coworkers is a great morale boost. So I would not underestimate that your code reviews should be structured in such a way that they improve morale, that people look forward to a code review as opposed to dreading it. So we'll talk a little bit about how to make that happen as well. Now, there's a difference between goals and metrics. You should define your goals, but then you need to think about how you're going to measure those. How are you going to measure quality? How are you going to measure morale? A lot of people say that they can't figure out a way to measure what their goals are. If you have a goal, it's worth measuring. It's worth figuring out how to measure it. I've been a big fan of the book How to Measure Anything. I was introduced to this book by Carrie Millsap, another Oracle ACE director, and I've actually purchased I think every edition, first, second, and third editions of this book personally. You don't have to use this book, but there are things that you can do to measure specific quality objectives or other goals that you have. For example, reduce post-deployment support calls by 10%. Well, if you're trying to measure quality and you want to improve quality, post-deployment support calls is a direct measure of quality. It doesn't necessarily seem that way, but that's a good measure of quality. Increase your team's velocity by 15%. If you're using the Agile methodology and you're using it well and correctly, your teams should be able to tell you what their velocity is in story points. You can't really compare one team's velocity to another team's velocity, but you can compare a single team's velocity over time. So you could increase team's velocity by 15%. You can improve your net promoter score by 20%. And I'll show you a specific example of that as well. But the net promoter score is a very quick, easy way to ask a question or two questions and get a feeling for how people like any kind of process. So the net promoter score has been a great invention over the last decade for people to assess how they're doing in whatever the business is. So I definitely recommend that you have some of these artifacts. And then you'll want to report on your results to demonstrate value. Again, part of the goal of this presentation is to provide development teams and development organizations with the justification to have a peer code review program. And many of the things I talk about are justification in and of themselves, but if you can report on results, track your results, and demonstrate the value, that's really how you will be able to continue with such a program as this. And again, if you do it right, it will improve morale. People will like to do them. So these are things that you'll want to be doing. So these are some key tenets to having a successful peer code review process. You want a culture where everyone is a developer. And I don't necessarily mean that everyone has to know SQL and PL SQL and JavaScript, but that everyone is invested in the development process. You could potentially grab a subject matter expert and ask them to do a code review. There's a great deal of study and resource that show that the subject matter experts gain from a code review as much as the developer. So there's a lot to having everyone in the organization have some participation as a developer. Everyone is definitely responsible for quality assurance as well. The developer, the QA folks, everyone has that responsibility. We often talk about collective ownership. A product is owned, the success or failure of the product is owned by everybody on that product team. QA, development, subject matter experts, everybody is responsible for it. And we're a culture where everyone gets an opportunity to do something fun, and everyone has to do some of the work that nobody wants to do. There's always something that nobody wants to do. You should share that work around, but in the same way, you should share the fun work and the kinds of things that people want to be doing. Also establish a culture where finding bugs is good. Better than that, you know, and it depends on what you want to define a bug, but a bug should be found before it makes it into production. And that's what we're looking for. We want to be able to find these before they make it into production. So we want to find those bugs and make it and celebrate finding them during our code review process. If code reviews find no bugs at all, that's only acceptable if there are never any bugs in production. So we want to find them in the code review process. We also want to measure improvement, and that's where we want our focus is to be on improvement, not on blame. And finally, where success is celebrated. So we want to have an opportunity to celebrate the successes of this peer code review program. So I recommend that you have a kickoff event. And at every kickoff event, it's effective to have food. It seems like such a small thing to say, but at your kickoff event, have some food, have some swag. You should have a deck that you present about why you're doing code reviews, and you should have the artifacts that are associated with this deck. And we'll get into some of those artifacts as we go along. You would obviously need to make some changes to this, but it's a reasonable start at a kickoff of what you're looking to do and why you're doing it. I recommend that you have refresher events for your peer code review on a regular basis, perhaps every 6 months or so. And at that event, you should have food, and you should celebrate your success, and you should have swag. And you should review the new artifacts and processes, because part of your code review process is to collect input and improve the code review process itself. So if every 6 months you're able to introduce slight changes or improvements based upon people's recommendations, you'll have better adoption to the program overall. And you should improve your code review process based upon that additional information. And so again, 6 months later, you should be able to repeat the process. So these are key elements to having a long-term successful peer code review process. So some more specific things. Some of your goals may include and should include the ease of maintenance and transition, and you should instantiate what is unique and important in your documentation. So by documenting your coding standards, you want to document what's unique to your organization. You don't need to put together a new PL SQL best practices guide, right? Those exist. If you go out, spend a couple minutes, find the best practices guide that you want to use that. You can identify that, but don't rewrite that. If there's something specific to your organization, that's what belongs in your coding standards guide. You should provide time for new developers to review those standards. I see often a project starts up and bring a few folks in, and the first few folks understand the standards and where everything is. But as we roll people off and onto a project, the new folks are expected to just somehow jump in and know how to do everything. You need to explicitly have a time period where they're expected to spend time reading those standards and understanding what the expectations are of the project. You should regularly review those standards and determine if there is a way to improve on the standards themselves. Developers only see value in providing input into the standards if the senior leadership demonstrates an interest by updating those standards. If your process involves allowing people to comment on your standards, you certainly should take those comments into thought when you do updates. And finally, build documentation that has long-term use. Self-documenting code and capturing requirements within online help are a couple of areas that you can easily review as part of your peer code review process. If you write large requirements documents, at best those large requirements documents get read one time. They get read by the developer who's trying to do the development. If instead you capture those requirements within the code or within the online help of the system itself, those will be used by lots of people throughout the lifetime of the application. So self-documenting code and capturing requirements within the online help or the user's guide of the system are all areas that will help in the development process and that can be reviewed as part of your peer code review process. So I'm going to give some examples of what you might have for your Apex coding standards. So applications subscribe to the INSOM LDAP authentication scheme from application 876. If folks aren't already doing this, it's great to have a common application, and that common application has all kinds of shared components, and other applications will subscribe to those. So that comes to something like this, as well as the third bullet where templates, LOVs, authentication schemes are all shared in a common application and subscribe to. That way you can push those, any changes to those shared components down throughout all of your applications. Every page should have an authorization scheme. That could be a standard. Now, perhaps every now and then you have a page that doesn't require one. That would be an exception in your standards. So these are standards that are just examples, but something to consider. So only used approved plugins that are stored in the common application. So again, if you wanted to have a developer that is looking to use a new plugin, that plugin might need to have an approval process so that you can use it. Another one, use declarative dynamic actions. If you can't use declarative ones, use documented ones. Again, just another example. And finally, use bind variable syntax. That is a standard that should always be applied in every group. So the next thing I'll talk about is making your code reviews lightweight. They should be done in such a way that they're done rapidly, they're done frequently, and they're done on small chunks of code. So you don't want to wait a month and do a code review. You want to wait until a small section of code is ready and then request a code review. And it should be the kind of thing that a developer, at the point that they think they have enough code that's worth being reviewed, can simply make a request and say, I'm ready for a code review. Who's available to review my code? And it can be another developer, it can be a manager, it could be a subject matter expert. It's whatever your organization decides they're going to do in order to establish code review. Now, in a room full of people, when I say, for example, that the subject matter expert or the QA person might be the code reviewer, I often get a little bit of skeptical looks. And that's a good time to bring up the magic of the potted plant. So some research has been done that shows that really it doesn't matter a lot who is on the reviewing side of a code review. The fact that the code review is happening, that the person that is the developer knows that they have to do a code review immediately before the code review even starts. Just the knowledge that they'll be doing a code review is enough to improve their coding. Then actually reviewing their own code, just stepping through it, showing it, demonstrating the functionality is the second most important part of improving quality. So literally, if you did a code review and the potted plant were the code reviewer, you would get benefit from it. Now, the potted plant doesn't get a lot of benefit out of the code review, but the developer does. By adding a reviewer into it, the reviewer gets additional benefit as well. The reviewer gets a look at the code, gets introduced to new coding styles. So the real point here is that code reviews should happen. They should be structured. They should have a checklist. They should have a number of elements, but they should happen. And if you can't get your ideal code reviewer to be the person reviewing the code, that's okay. Get the next person on your list and have them do the code review, because both people will benefit. The developer will benefit and the reviewer will benefit. So don't wait. Schedule your code review, get the code review to happen, keep it short, and it's better to have too many code reviews too soon than too few too late. I'd much rather see a code review happen and get partway through and say, you know what, I really need to go back and rework some of this. Let's close this code review out right now. We'll shut it down early, and I'll come back in 3 days and review it because I've learned enough to know that I've done something wrong. That's much better than to go 3 weeks and get into the code review and realize, wow, I didn't even understand what the requirement was. So it's much better to have too many too soon than too few too late. But to make this really effective, to be efficient about this, and to make it so that anyone can be the reviewer, you need to publish and use an agenda. So I'm going to provide a sample agenda. This is a sample agenda. You're welcome to use this or come up with your own. So keep in mind, we've got a small bit of code, something that's a small section. That's what we're going to do as part of our code review. So my first step in the sample agenda is review automated code review results. So we haven't talked about it yet, but I will. Automated code reviews should happen before your peer code review. Things like running the Apex Advisor. Those should have already been done. And so when the developer says, I'm ready for a code review, the first thing they can do is say, yes, I ran the Apex Advisor against page 39, and it resulted in, and here are the results of the automated code review. You can do that very, very quickly. The reason that's the first step, it's even before the second step, is because if you get to that step and the developer says, I haven't done this yet, I haven't reviewed the automated code results, you should just stop the code review right then and schedule it for an hour later, because let them go back, review those automated code review results, make sure everything's good, and then come back and have your code review. So if you've spent your few minutes just checking out, making sure that the automation worked well, turn on your camera, talk about the weather, your kids, etc. Huge advantages to getting to know the people you work with. This is a real challenge right now. I'm speaking to a group of people. I can't see their faces. I don't know if I'm speaking too quickly. I don't know if I'm really understanding the room. I suppose I probably can see if anybody has dropped off. Fortunately, they haven't yet, but it's a challenge. And I'm sure it's a challenge for you as well. Many of you are probably multitasking, and you may not have even heard the last few seconds of what I said, but by turning your cameras on, establishing a connection with the person at the other end of the code review, you can dramatically improve not only the code review itself, but the morale of your organization. And really, you get better buy-in from your entire organization when they know each other. Now, ideally, you're going to do this sitting next to each other, but the reality in our world today is often these code reviews happen across continents or across states, and certainly across town. So I've probably spent more time than 4 minutes just talking about turning on your camera, but I really believe in this step. I really recommend that you spend some time on this. 4 minutes is not very much time to dedicate to letting people get to know each other, and you'll see huge benefits from it. So next, 10 full minutes discussing the functionality without looking at any code. You can demonstrate the functionality, you can show what it does, but spend a significant amount of time discussing and demonstrating the functionality of what it is that you're about to review without looking at the code. And you'll see a little bit about this when we talk about a checklist and using a checklist. But this is a key element so that it's clear that the developer really knows what it is that they were developing. I can say in my personal experience, being on both ends of it, I've been in code reviews where I was reviewing other people's code, and they would stumble around about what the code was supposed to do, and we'd finally realize that they really didn't have a good understanding of what the requirement was. And to be honest, I've been on the other end of that as well, when I start describing it, realizing that what I had written didn't actually meet what I knew the requirement to be. And so I've cut things off and gone back and said, wait a minute, I didn't develop the right code. Without even the reviewer saying a word, you sometimes have these realizations. Next, review the code utilizing a checklist. That should take about 15 minutes. Now, you'll see this is my sample agenda. Having a link directly to the checklist within your agenda makes it that much easier for people to have access to your code review checklist. I'm going to demonstrate an application that has this agenda in it and make this available to folks. But reviewing your code utilizing a checklist is a key element. And that checklist can be very small to start, and it should remain fairly small because you're only talking about approximately 15 minutes, but you should be able to go through that checklist and hit every element on it. And that checklist should be specific to your organization. Again, I'll provide a checklist as a sample. Now, during the time that you're doing this, you may find that you're fixing some defects. You might have a spelling mistake on a label. You might have something really minor. And one of the beauties of Apex is it's just so easy to fix these things. So I encourage you to go ahead and fix those really, really trivial things, spelling mistakes, really minor changes. Just fix them right in the code review rather than having to come back and do it later. But if you've done that, if you've made those changes, spend just a moment after you've gone through the whole code to kind of recap. Okay, these are the changes I made during code review, so that you actually have some understanding that you did make some changes during that code review. The next few minutes are really about documenting the code review itself, and these are probably more time than it will actually take, but all of these are sort of estimates. But you should document the results of your code review, and you should create any news stories that come out of your code review. And you should have a link on a way to go ahead and document this. Every organization should be doing some tracking of their code review. I'm going to provide, as part of this, an artifact on the InSum website, an application, an Apex application that you can use to do these things. It's very basic, very rudimentary, but I'm not looking for a lot. It could be anything. You could use a Google Doc to do this. You could use a spreadsheet. You can use really just about anything that you're able to capture the information. But I'll provide an Apex application at the end of this session to you if you decide to use that. You should document how to improve the code review process itself. So we want this to be a continually improving process. So as part of your each and every code review, you should give the people, the developer and the reviewer, the opportunity to make a suggestion to your process, to your code review process. If you do all of this with this timeline, it's about 45 minutes. I recommend that you block an hour, but that you target 45 minutes, and that's your code review. Now, you'll find that you're doing code reviews. Every developer should be doing a code review every week, maybe 2 code reviews, possibly 3 or 4 code reviews every week. But even if they're doing 4 code reviews a week, that's not bad, because that's less than 4 hours a week for 36 hours of development time. That's actually pretty good. If we could all target 4 code reviews a week per developer, that would be great. I think you're unlikely to get that. I think you're more likely to get 2 a week, but 2, 3, 4 is better than 1 every 2 weeks. So I definitely highly recommend that you encourage folks, when they have small chunks of code, that they schedule a code review and that they document it in this way. And I'll go ahead in a moment and show you an application that I have for that. Let's jump in a little bit farther and talk about automated reviews. The first step of our code review is to review automation. There's no point in going through your code review and looking for all of the things that an automated tool could do for you. There are a lot of automated tools that exist out here. These are some samples. Automatically, everyone already has access to the Apex Advisor. You should go ahead and run the Apex Advisor on every application. It's there, it's easy to do. Apex World, Apex Sec, Apex Regex, these are all things, Apex Cert, all things you can choose to use as an organization and make it part of your standards. But at absolute minimum, you should make the Apex Advisor a part of your standards.
Anton?
Yes.
Sorry, we do have a question, and it's relating to an earlier part of your presentation. This is a question from Dennis, and it's a little bit long, so I'll have to go very carefully through it. Here's the question. You said that code review should start as soon as possible and for as short as possible fragments of code. But in this case, the code could be reviewed only for technical stuff, like it's obeying the code standards and stuff. And when things are reviewed at the end of developing some unit of business logic, it enables the reviewer to check the correctness of implementation of business logic itself, which is part of the QA AFAIK. Your thoughts?
Yes, as far as I know. My thoughts are absolutely it is a great idea to have a longer code reviews scheduled for larger chunks of code. But that doesn't mean that you should skip the small chunks. If you've done small chunks along the way, you'll have a better opportunity to catch even those correctness questions, because those, as you demonstrate the functionality, will come up anyway. However, certainly if you have a larger chunk of code that you as a developer feel hangs together as a module or a unit, in those cases, I recommend, first of all, when possible, to try to have a consistent reviewer during the bulk of those intermediate code reviews that you've done along the way, so that they have some understanding of it already. But then schedule potentially a longer code review, and potentially even a code review that's not a peer code review, but an organization code review that you'd bring a larger team involved in. And that's certainly something that you could layer on top of this. So really, your organization could approach it a couple of different ways. One would be to simply continue the peer code review process, but have a longer code review for one of those modules, or potentially have a monthly or weekly, for example, code review where people get together and have that process. When you look at the scaled agile framework, which I'm a big proponent of, excuse me, the scaled agile framework schedules a innovation sprint about once a quarter throughout the year, so about once every 3 months. And when we use that, we schedule those kinds of code reviews and technical architecture reviews as part of an innovation and planning sprint. So that's a great comment.
And Anton, we have, Dennis, I hope I think we've answered the second part of your question that came up right after. Okay, and Dennis responds, okay, right, the main idea is to mix the approaches.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. And now we have a question from Jason. His question is, what is the value in using tools such as Apex diff in order to be able to easily visualize changes from one version of code to another? Is this superior to simply putting SQL export files under source control?
So that's an interesting topic. So tools like Apex diff, and source control and so forth, really give you an opportunity to see what the changes were, right? You can say, this is what the code used to be, this is what the code is now. And my experience with them is, as a developer, I find them to be helpful, but as a part of a code review process, I find them not to be that helpful. As the reviewer, seeing what the changes were just presented to me without the context of having worked through it hasn't, to me, seemed to be a useful use of the brief 45-minute code review. I would prefer, as a reviewer, to have the developer walk me through their understanding of the code and so forth, rather than looking back at the previous version. Certainly, a reviewer and a developer may find that doesn't work as well for them, but in my experience, I would rather spend that time really getting the developer's perspective on the new code as it's written. So. And
that's all the questions we have so far.
Okay, great. So a couple of little things. Little things that you can do as part of your code review process, and something that we do all the time is we always take a look at the authorization scheme and build option associated with every page. So what we do is we just require our developers to add those 2 columns to the report that shows when you first edit any application. So if we pick up this application 107, we can see right away that when we look at this, that these 2 pages don't have authorization schemes. And as Our coding standards have every page should have an authorization scheme. So what this has done is it's made the code review happen really quickly because I can see that the authorization scheme isn't there. But more importantly is if your developer has this as saved as their primary report, if that's the way they've saved it, they'll see it all the time, and they'll notice it before it ever gets to code review. Every time that we do a code review, if I see a developer that doesn't have those two columns in their normal report that they're always looking at, I actually take the time within the code review to walk them through adding those two columns and saving the primary report. In a very similar way, you can use the Apex views, the data dictionary views within Apex, to create your own corporate standard queries and add those in. And so you can have an Apex repository report application that just checks for things. You can have your own corporate naming standards. You can have things like every page needs to have an authorization scheme. You can have every item on every page needs to have an authorization scheme. Whatever it might be, whatever your corporate standards are, you can automate those within your own reports. And Apex Cert has the ability to add things like that as well. I have an audit app that we've used in the past. I'll include that with the artifacts that you can add your own queries to, and it does the same thing. It just queries the Apex data dictionary and looks for the things that we're concerned about as specific to our application. So the other thing that you can do is you should solicit as part of every code review if there are things that people think should be added to your standards. So as part of the code review, you should be asking what can improve the code review process, and what you might start seeing is people saying, please add this check to our automation so that we don't have to look for it every time. So I'll give some examples of that. So use checklists. You should have a checklist of what is unique to your organization that you want to see it. You can use anything, a spreadsheet, an Apex application, a web sheet. I don't care what it is, but you should have some sort of checklist, and that checklist should be easily accessible directly from your agenda, so that when you're walking through, these are the steps of our code review, the checklist is right there. Make it specific to Apex and to your development environment. You should capture the results somewhere, somehow, across all your code reviews, just so that you know how you're doing. And finally, I'll say, usually the goal is not to catch every possible bug, but to efficiently and significantly improve quality. There are some organizations in which, and some kinds of code that people work on, in which life and death is on the line, and they're looking to catch every possible bug. Peer code reviews have a place in those environments, but there are certainly other things that have to happen as well. The peer code review isn't about finding every possible bug, but it's about quickly, efficiently improving quality. So again, you're not looking to solve everything in this process, but you are looking to improve things overall. So I'm going to give us a quick sample checklist of what your organization might use as a checklist. And I'm not going to go through every step here, but you can see a few things in here. The first element is, can the primary developer describe the functionality with precision and certainty? If we go back to our agenda, and I'll show the agenda again, we spend 10 minutes early on not looking at code, just talking about what the code is supposed to do. That's this first element in your checklist, right? If you've spent 10 minutes talking about the code, not even looking at the code, when you come to actually doing the code portion, this first one should absolutely happen. So I'm going to jump back here, and I'm going to take a pause here to show a little application. This application is something that I put together very quickly in order to capture information about a code review. The idea is that at the beginning of every code review, your developers would come here and they would say, okay, my name is Anton, and Mark is reviewing my code, and my code is the InSum checklist application. And these are our goals. These are our code review goals: to improve our skills, improve morale, improve client satisfaction, reduce the number of bugs deployed code by 200, have a net promoter score of 50 or higher for this process, for this code review process. We want people to think that it's a good process. And we want to increase our reusable code base by 20 procedures by March 2019. So it's important, again, to document your goals and to share those goals with everybody so they understand this is why we're doing this. We want to do these things. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start my review. I start my review. I've got my sample agenda right in front of me. I need to review my automated code review results. It should take about 4 minutes. So at this point, the developer would say, here it is. I worked on page 39. Here's the review of the results. They all look good. Any questions? Again, very, very quick. That shouldn't take long at all. Turn on your camera. Spend a few minutes talking about the day. Discuss and demonstrate the functionality. So that's what we were just talking about. Spend about 10 minutes really showing the functionality. Then review the code. And we're going to use a checklist. So I've got my checklist right here. The first thing is, well, can the developer describe the functionality with precision and accuracy and certainty? So that should have already happened, right? That should be step 3 of our agenda. And then we'll run through all these steps, right? Is the business logic and PL SQL packages, etc. So you should be able to run through all of these at the end of your code review and make sure that you've done all of these things. I like this one. Review the 2 longest running components for obvious improvements. So run the page in debug mode and then review the results. Many, many times I've done code reviews and I've seen the page running a little bit slowly and I've asked the developer, did you ever run this page in debug mode? And the answer is no. I never once ran the page in debug mode. My feeling is no Apex page should ever make it to production without having been run in debug mode at least once. So if you make this part of the checklist, you can be pretty sure that the developer will have run the page in debug mode before they even come to this point. So again, sort of the magic of the potted plant. The simple fact that they're going to be doing a code review and that code review is going to have this checklist means that the developer will have already run the page in debug mode. That alone will likely improve the quality of your code and it'll be much less likely that a bug will make it to production, and more so, it'll be less likely that a bug that is something like a performance issue will make it to production, because you can very rapidly take a look at what's going slow on this page. So there's our checklist. Review the code fixed during this code review. Document the results. So document the results, that's our next step. We click next here. This application simply gives a place to say, how many bugs did we fix during the review? I fixed 2 bugs during the review. There are 3 bugs that we identified during the review that I need to fix, but I don't need to review them again. It'll help there if you're wondering what the difference between these are. This is a bug that needs to be fixed, but it's small enough that it doesn't require another review. The number of issues to be fixed and reviewed again, right? So there's some things that might be big enough that you say, you jointly agree as the developer and the reviewer that, yeah, I know you're going to go back and fix this, but I want to see this again. Let's schedule another quick review once that's done. So we had 2 of those, and we realized that there were some things that this just drives a new story, a new feature, something that we didn't consider at all, and we're just going to create a new story for that. And so how many new stories were created? 2 new stories. Well, usually it's going to be 0. Hopefully we didn't have any new stories, but it certainly could. The next thing is the ability to suggest a code review process for improvement, right? What could we do better? Well, I think we should add to our checklist to have, I don't know, grilled cheese, whatever. And then this is a little bit specific to InSum, but we're trying to instantiate a culture of it. If people do code reviews here at InSum, I'm going to send them some swag. Not everybody every time, but if you want some swag, you did a good code review, maybe you put in some good suggestions, throw in your address, you might get an Oracle hat or an InSum ice cream scoop. So, and then here's the part about the Net Promoter Score. As part of this, we have a goal to make sure that our process is valuable to the reviewer and to the developer. So the reviewer and the developer are going to give us a score. How's this process working for you? Terrible, wouldn't recommend it, neither good nor bad, or great. So far, I think we're probably scoring around a 60 with the process as we've got it going and defined. So I'm going to give it a 60, and the reviewer is going to give it, say, an 80. Wow, that would be great if we can get to that. And then, is there anything that you want to add to our code library? Anything else that you want to add to the whole process? That's what this is for. So if somebody can complete that, we save and complete. It doesn't take much time at all. It probably adds maybe 2 minutes to our overall agenda. And if we go back and check our agenda, that's what we allowed for. We allowed for about 7 minutes to do all of that documentation as part of this, but hopefully it will take less than 7 minutes. So I'm running through pretty quickly. So the next thing is, not every defect gets fixed, at least not today, right? We may find a defect and say, it's just too big and it's not critical for our code deployment. We're going to go ahead and create a new story. So I definitely recommend that you have the opportunity within your code review to say, okay, we're going to table this, we're going to create a new story on this. And you need to empower the developer and the reviewer to make that call or to engage with the product owner when there's disagreement on whether this should be a new story. Assess results, track results, make improvements. As I said, you should keep track of bugs by category. These are the categories I recommend. You may have a different set for your organization, but it's an easy way to see that you're making progress. And the culture really should be that finding bugs is good, especially if you're finding them before they make it into production. Every defect that you find before it makes it into production is a huge efficiency gain in the overall ability to deliver good quality code. So we have some code review artifacts. This deck will be on insum.ca along with the application I showed and a little Apex application that you can extend on your own that does a few minor checks. Your organization, in order to kick off a code review process, should have a set of documented goals and define metrics that support those goals. A kickoff deck to support a fabulous kickoff event that includes food and swag. A set of coding standards, a code review checklist, a location to log the number of bugs found, a location to method to request improvements to all of these items, and an agenda that links to all the items above. And I would say it's better to start the peer code review process even if you don't have all of these elements in place. The sooner you start it, the better. And you can always add to that. If you have that agenda, and that agenda is something that people go to over and over again, and that you can add links to for the additional items, you can start it today, and right away, you have the opportunity to improve. And I think that's an important aspect. Start now, improve as you go. So it's 2:53. I think that's pretty good. Mark, do we have any additional questions? So Mark, I can't hear you. I hope folks can hear me.
Anton, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Great.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, no, I was just saying we've no additional questions on the subject matter.
Okay, great.
So far. So, I mean, now is the time to throw in your questions because we're getting close to the 3 o'clock mark. So if anyone has any. Oh, okay, I got one question.
Okay.
Any suggestions for a set of development standards for Apex development?
Yes, we at Insum have a set of standards, and I've actually been working to sort of make those consumable for a more generic public audience. I will have a blog post out with the artifacts that I've mentioned here right away. At the latest, this week, but hopefully tomorrow I'll have a blog post out with the artifacts that I just talked about right now, maybe even today. When it comes to coding standards, we'll have another blog post out very soon. reluctant to commit to a date, but very soon that point to some of our own standards, but also other standards that are available out there. What I would recommend is that you do your best to pick a set of standards, perhaps the ones that we provide or something else that you find, and then layer on top of those things that are specific to your organization. Having things that are very specific to your organization is really a key element to that.
I just want to add to that, if people are not familiar, you can go to our website and see our blog section, which is insum.ca blogs, under resources, and you can see, you'll see Anton's new blog post, as he said, within today or tomorrow. Anton?
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate everybody's participation, and we'll talk to you on the next webinar.
Anton, do you have time for one more question?
I do, certainly.
Okay. Howard asks, please return to the code review application. I would like to take a quick screenshot of it.
Excellent.
Not a question, but a screenshot.
I'll walk through each of the screens so that you have the opportunity. So. Okay, so there's our quick first screen.
Howard, take photos.
Yeah, there's our next screen, and I'll actually pull up the checklist so you can see them side by side. And I'll take the next here. This application and the one database table that sits behind it will be available on my blog post within the next 36 hours. So if you want this application exactly as you see it right now, it will be available to download and install in your Apex environment.
Anton, we have another question that came in. Actually, we have a couple more. Okay, from Dennis. When we talk about PLSQL or JavaScript code resided in repo, it's clear how to have a review, but what about Apex apps and pages, which is export file is unreadable?
Yeah, well, so the Apex application, really the only way to review an Apex application is through the builder. You have to log into the Apex development environment and walk through the builder to show it. I don't know of any other way.
All right, and we have a question from Rohit, who asks, you mentioned earlier that there can be a single common app which should be used for subscribing in other apps. Can you please elaborate?
Absolutely. Let me go ahead and log in here. So this is my own personal dumping ground. But if we had an application that we considered our master application, so if this were our master application, we would go into this application, and under shared components, we would have any shared components, lists, navigation elements, lists of values. We would create them here. So let's say I create a list of values here. My LOV, and I'm just going to make it a static LOV, and I'm going to say A, B, B. So I have this list of values, and it's my LOV. It's got A and B in it. Anywhere in any application, I want this LOV. What I would do is in another application, I would let's see. Let me just pull something up here. If I were to use that LOV, what I would do is I'd come to supporting objects. I'm sorry, not support. I'd go to shared objects. Let me just pull this again. I'd come to shared components. When I create a new list of values, I would create it as a copy of an existing list of values. I would always copy it from my my shared application, my master application. I would copy and subscribe. Now, by doing that, by having this LOV, copy and subscribe, I now have this, and it's tied to that master application. And if there's any changes to this master LOV, I can simply refresh this LOV and it will automatically get those. And if I go to the master LOV, I can push those changes down to any application that uses them. The master application never even needs to get promoted through to your test or production environments. All it's used for is to make sure that you push your changes down to other applications that subscribe from it. So you can do that with a whole host of shared components, themes, report templates, anything that you're using in more than one place. I would recommend that master application.
Okay, we're getting close to the wire here, but I'll throw in a few extra comments. Rohit commented, I have many distributed apps using similar features, but I create entities again, like LOVs and authentication schemes. How can I sync everything in one place?
Oh, that's absolutely exactly like this. So, for example, I have this app 168. It now has my LOV. I have this other. I have the test application. If I could use that subscription in a whole host of places. Let me go back up to here, and then all you have to do is if you make a change. So I'm going to go back to my master application. I'm going to go to my list of values. I'm going to make a change to this list of values. I'll add a row. I'll save that. So I've made that save. You can imagine that I might have 30 applications that all subscribe to this LOV. All I have to do is click Publish LOV, and it would show me my list of 30 applications. I would click Publish. That LOV would get updated in all 30 applications. So hopefully that answers your question. And that's true of authentication schemes, authorization schemes, you know, a whole host of shared items.
And we have another question from Elizabeth, and she asks, how do you recommend creating common shared components when you have several different workspaces?
That's definitely a bigger challenge. I think the way you would do it is have, you know, one shared application, one common application in each of those workspaces, and you'd have to duplicate to those. It's not an answer I have it's not a question I have a great answer to. I would recommend that each workspace have a common application, but syncing across those common applications is certainly a challenge between workspaces.
And I'll put to you Mohammed's question, which is, hi, do you have a code review checklist items that you can share and that can apply generally?
So the application that I'm providing has a reasonable start at a checklist. Let me pull that up right here. If we run this application and we click here, it includes a checklist right here. But I think what you might be asking is actually for some more specifics than this particular checklist. And what I would recommend is using the Apex Advisor for those kinds of things that are part of the Apex Advisor, or establishing some sort of automation. If there are things that can be automated that you're checking for every time, I recommend automation for those. The kinds of things in this checklist that you're actually covering during the code review are things that are a little bit harder to automate. You know, review the 2 longest running components for obvious improvements. You can't automate that. That's something that you just want a quick look at it. I see the 2 longest components. You know, you have a quick discussion about them. You know, have they, you know, they look like they're running pretty fast. Have you done an explain plan? Those kinds of things. So as we develop our internal standards, though, I'm happy to sort of sanitize those and publish them as blog posts.
Fantastic. Anton, I think that's all the questions we have time for. If I've not answered your comment or question, we do look at them after the presentation, and we can get back to you by email directly. If you're okay, Anton, we'll conclude now.
That's great. Thanks, everyone.
And thank you everybody so much for joining us in our presentation today. And as Anton mentioned at the beginning, a recording of this presentation will be made available. If you'd like access to it, we'll actually email it to you anyway because you participated in the presentation, and we'll also put it on our website for later consultation as well. So you'll see that within a few days. So on behalf of everyone at InSum, we'd like to thank you for your time, and we very much hope to see you soon at our next webinars. Thank you very much. Goodbye.